Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Marty and myself sat down with Phil Tippett recently, and you're going to be surprised where the conversation goes. We really cover a lot of ground, but we go some interesting places. Phil is so talented and such an interesting person that I'm so grateful we had the chance to talk to him. So we hope you enjoy this one. Let's make our way over to the bridge. We're very excited to have Phil Tippett with us today. I am a huge fan of Phil, so I'm super excited to have you here, Phil. If you have seen Star Wars, Jurassic Park, RoboCop, Starship Troopers, you know Phil's artistic talent. And Phil has a new film out called Mad God. It's mind-blowing, let's just say it. It's really the most unique film I have seen in ages. It's just so refreshing to see you do something amazing, Phil, like this, and you've been working on it so long, and I just want to congratulate you on finishing this. This film is amazing, and I can't wait for other people to see it. I'm sure you feel the same way. I hope I'm not giving you too much praise here.
Well, certainly all praise is welcome. You know, it's done really well at film festivals and is going to drop on Shudder. Shudder picked it up on June 15th, and we're in the process of closing a deal with the Japanese for theatrical, and they may want to put out a line of toys. And then Shudder, we're talking to Shudder about doing a game.
Oh, wow. Like a video game.
Video game, yeah.
And that, well, the Japanese market seems very ripe for that film. It's,
absolutely, yeah.
Well, I think I told you before that after seeing the three parts, my feeling, I felt squished. I felt compressed. I felt, I don't know, how do I identify that in any sort of emotional way besides that kind of was it. Do you have intent with how you want people to feel?
No.
You want people to feel however they want, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. You know, my friend John Davison that produced RoboCop and Starship Troopers, when asked what was, you know, Starship Troopers about, he would say it's about 2 hours. And yeah, and then Paul Verhoeven, you know, was asked why does there have to be such sex and violence in movies? And Paul's answer was, movies don't have to be about anything. Art shouldn't be about anything. It shouldn't be a polemic, you know. It shouldn't. It shouldn't be a message, you know. As who is the head of Warner Brothers, Jack Warner, said, "If you want a message, send a telegram." You know, all art should not be about anything. You know, I mean, it is, but all the polemic stuff is not of any interest to me. You know, it's just, if it's not mysterious and unfathomable, you know, and you can't project into it, but if you're being lectured to, then to me, it's not worthy of being called art. It's art, but, you know, but it's like, you know, a different form of art that's not interesting to me.
So it's been fun going through. Have you been going to the film festivals or going online? Or
well, I went to Locarno in Switzerland for the world premiere, and I'm 70, and so that was just a big slog for me. You know, it was not just you know, the time zone change, but you know, there were just interview after interview after interview after interview, you know, and parties and parties and parties. By the end of it, I was just exhausted. So, and then the pandemic kind of clamped things as well. So, mostly just, you know, this kind of thing.
Well, it is. It's the best movie I've seen in a while. I find myself, I'm one of those people that will revisit films that I love. And I think I saw a segment, perhaps, or some sort of footage that there's more live action, and Alex Cox is in it, whom is a very interesting fellow, and he made one of, I'd say, a favorite 80s film of mine, Repo Man.
Right.
And how did you hook up with Alex then? Have you known him since the 80s, or did you meet him?
Yeah, we tried to develop some projects together with John Davison. uh, and one of them was Mars Attacks, based on the you know cards, bubblegum cards, and then we got Martin Amis, the English writer, involved with it too. And the studio didn't understand our sense of humor, and then Tim Burton picked it up and made a crappy movie.
Yeah, Tim Burton. He I liked him in the 80s and early 90s, and then it turned into. I mean, a lot of directors, and I don't mean to bash the directors, but a lot of their films, when they need special effects, it turns into a cartoon or a video game. And for many of us, we want to see something real, and obviously you're leading the way in that sense.
Well, real-ish, movies are all pretend, so.
Hmm. Well, is there a correlation then between people that would rather see the animation that's created with actual puppets, and also to the listener that doesn't want to download their music? They would rather own the record and have the turntable. Is there a correlation to people, to the connection that people have with wanting something in front of them, wanting something that they know is in front of them? It's not digital, it's not drawn in the same way.
Yeah, well, there seems to be a pretty, growing public sentiment in that way. A lot of people are just bored with digital, and there's growing interest. I mean, stop motion has never been as popular as it is now. I mean, I was just looking at Instagram, and it's just full of people stop motion work. They all tend to be kind of cutesy, like Pixar-ish, that mindset. But a few leak through. Actually, I haven't seen any that I liked, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean they don't exist.
Well, there's probably a lot of people that, well, just because it's not the same commercial aspect of or commercial market in some
Exactly.
ways, but like you said, it's growing, and I hope we see more of it because there are more young people that are growing up in a world where well, we're seeing it. Like I was just using the correlation to music. There's more young people that want records, and they don't remember there ever being record stores.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
they're being raised in a with their playlists and their digital music, which is fine and fun, but there are still young people that they want to hear the music on vinyl. They want their turntable and their analog speakers and amps and stuff. It's I think there's something there when it comes to understanding where that creation came to, because there's a little bit of magic is lost in computers. I mean, they help us out.
I think a lot of magic is lost, because as Dennis Murin said, they are, if you we always felt that they were like three-dimensional cartoons, and when you have a object like a stop motion puppet, it is a real thing. You're not fooling anybody, and there's lights, and it's just it's a pictorial document of what is there.
Looking at I mean, we've got some big movies coming up with like James Cameron, who seems to always have been doing this digital stuff, right? Like he kind of brought to light when we've got these Avatar movies coming out. They're a fun little ride. What's your feeling on those? Do you think they're fun and to be seen as? I mean, obviously I know that you don't want anyone to think any particular thing about anything,
Why
but for
not?
yourself, is it a fun cartoon to you to watch, or is it not fun at all? What's your take when you see a
Yeah,
film
I
that
didn't go
that
see the other avatars. One was enough for me. I mean, Cameron's a consummate filmmaker, and but one thing it turns me off about him is he really doesn't have a very developed sense of humor, and
mm,
that's essential for me. My intention wasn't to put humor into Mad God. It just kind of opportunities came up that ended up being humorous, and that helps with such dark material. to kind of lift it a bit instead of making it like totally depressing. But I didn't launch into it. Those first three, DVDs that you saw don't have any humor in it at all, but there's enough to sustain, kind of lift it, a bit. And those are the things I was working with ultimately when I kind of found my voice in this thing was, humor and horror and beautiful and ugly, and working within the bounds of those juxtapositions.
Something that we spoke about before was you were mentioning. Well, you were talking about your fascination with puppets, and you referred back to um, Egyptians, and even they were using puppets, and I assume that they were using these puppets to tell stories.
To start at the end, I mean, it's not at the end. Puppets have existed, throughout history, and they have been at the forefront of many art movements. Particularly surrealism. Surrealists use puppet theater a great deal. One of the things that you can get with puppets that you can't get with, say, a stage performance is you can deal with the the bizarre in a way that allows you to enter into like a completely other world rather than the world that we're generally presented with. And there are a number of really good books on the history of puppetry, and so it just seems fascinating to to folks. It continues to.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Is it too easy to say that the puppeteer is playing God to a puppet? Is it?
Yeah,
Does it?
that's a question that's asked. I know that Ray, has been asked, if he has a God complex, and of course not.
Hmm. Do you think it relates to humans in some way? Do you feel like a puppet ever? Do you think we are? It was something that you said before that actually has not left me, Phil, and that's you said we're all very well rehearsed, and uh, and it's so
Well, I
true.
certainly am. I've been asking questions for quite some time, so I'm preaching my gospel.
And it's about being polite too, right? It's simply manners, and being polite is
Fuck you.
but it sometimes makes you wonder, and I don't want to go deep into free will here, but it's something that the metaphor is really beautiful. I think there when I think of puppetry and uh, and the artist.
Well, I personally do not work from intention. I work primarily from the unconscious, and that's was a huge contributing factor to Mad God. I mean, I'm a very prolific dreamer and write down my dreams, and they really help me not necessarily organize Mad God, but I got the vibe because my dreams have a beginning and then kind of a muddy second act, but one way or another, the beginning resolves itself somehow in the third act. And that was kind of my compass for Mad God. It's not a conventional narrative in any way. There's an interview with Picasso years ago, and the interviewer asked what he was looking for in a painting, and Picasso said, "I do not seek, I find." When Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart were interviewed or asked, where does your amazing music come from? They point up and say it came from God. I was only transcribing it. And that's what it feels like to me, is like you're just working on, intuition and your unconscious. But yeah, you're talking about the kind of person, with, many artists that, started their journey my journey started when I was 5 years old, and so I've got a lot more than the 10,000 hours that is required to, as they say, become, whatever you would call it, like a master of your craft. And so, I actually don't think about anything. It's almost like riffing on a piano. You're just acting intuitively.
And that's the common story you hear from someone who creates beautiful things is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Do you think you would get different answers from? And this artist really stands out, and I want to say I'm a little bit ignorant to who he was and the meaning behind a lot of his paintings, but Bosch, Harmonious Bosch, and are there questions you have for him, or you go fuck it? He probably would say the same thing, or I have no idea, I'm not interested, or do you want to know how he did what he did? Is that interest to you?
No, I've read up a lot about Bosch, and there's a lot of conjecture as to his symbolism, but nobody really knows. I mean, there are some things like the tin funnels on people's head had some particular kind of meaning. So, um, academics have dissected that. I mean, the influences just come from everywhere, like, Samuel Beckett and Bosch and Peter Bruegel and his son, and even Bob Dylan. When I was a teenager, when he started doing his more poetic surrealist work. I mean, all of that filters in and becomes part of your education.
Mm-hmm.
This is what, well, so I shot about 30 years, about 3 minutes of material for Mad God. The digital revolution hit, and Mad God was too big in scale. I had to shoot it on film, which is a pain in the ass. So it haunted me, and I just spent the next 20 years studying, everything I could get my hands on, Freud and Jung and archaeology and paleontology and various philosophies. Dante and Milton are mixed in there somewhere, and there's this great quote from Dante here that kind of relates to Mad God. I was thinking about using this as the roll up for Mad God, but now I found a better quote from Leviticus, and I use the Torah instead of the Bible. I mean, they're almost identical, but the Leviticus quote is like really a mean God. Anyway, so back to Dante. I'll read this, and I have this as a kind of a mantra that I can look at here, and it says, Virgil makes clear to Dante that all the souls in hell remain there by choice, unable to let go of everything that damned them in the first place. So, I mean, orbiting that a little bit, helped me have a little bit of a gravitational center for Mad God, not, but very indirectly.
You mentioned Hieronymus Bosch. I don't know if you guys already talked about him, but looking at his work, it's also in this sort of pessimistic, fantastical kind of style. And I know that Hieronymus Bosch's work has sometimes been interpreted as sort of a coming from a Gnostic tradition, if you know what that means. And in that tradition, God is evil, or at least some versions of that, right? God is actually the kind of like the architect in the Matrix. Is that sort of where Mad God is sort of coming from? That the entire setup has been rigged by some mad god in that flavor, or
I don't think the Mad God is sane. I don't think it's present enough it's just chaos. I don't view Bosch as, scary or horrible. I see it as being, beautiful and quizzical, you know,
right?
at, at, at the same time as, presenting a vision of hell. I would not want to be in, a character in any of his paintings.
But also a vision of paradise, right? He always does this sort of
Yes.
contrast. I guess in the Garden of Earthly Delights, his most famous work, you've got paradise on the left, you've got Judgment Day on the right, and in the middle you've got actually a really beautiful, I think, evocation of human sexuality, and these people are just sort of going about their business and indulging in a not good or evil way. So there's this ambiguity, right? I think in his work that
Yeah, but they're not as fun as the hell parts.
oh yeah. So is that what draws
that's
you
where
to
all the
the
good stuff is.
yeah? Is that what draws you to this sort of dystopic thing, or is it a matter of catharsis that you're sort of trying to like watching tragedy, right? You sort of see somebody else suffering and it relieves your own. Is it that kind of thing, or is it just that it's kind of like visually, aesthetically more interesting? There's just more going on in hell than there is in heaven.
Well, I was, from a very early age, drawn to horror films,
Hmm.
so that's certainly a huge influence. I wasn't intentionally trying to, and I don't think I did evoke horror in Mad God, but just strangeness and otherness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I need to reread Inferno. Because I read it when I was younger, and I remember struggling through it and thinking, "You can do it, you can do it." And it was almost like, I mean, it's an epic poem, so uh, I mean, I wasn't trained that well to read it,
Yeah.
but I do want to revisit, and because I do and just to go back to Mad God, I really do like that Heart of Darkness journey. There's something about that that's a draw, and Phil, is that an interest or a work that you appreciate? Heart of Darkness, or even Apocalypse Now? Is that when you saw that? Did that affect you in that same way of that the journey to the deep dark human nature?
Yeah, well, I've read, Conrad, and certainly. I never thought about Apocalypse Now being an influence, but now that you mention it, it's yeah, it's a journey into hell. So the movies have that in common.
Is there a goal to get out of hell? Like once you go to hell, is the goal to get through and come to something else?
It's contained in this quote.
Right.
Um, the souls are unable to let go of everything that damned them in the first place. No, they're stuck in their own vortex or cycle. And
Mm.
that's just a hell. Of something that just repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself. That drives you mad.
Well, that sounds like hell on earth kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the description of a psychological state where you
Yeah.
can't break out of your own cycles.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of I discovered while I was working on Mad God, I self-diagnosed, that I'm not bipolar but unipolar, meaning that I don't get depressed unless there's a good reason for getting depressed, but I'm definitely manic, and that got me through Mad God.
Mm.
I'm dyslexic, which is why I never read the Inferno. I had to listen to it all on tape, and I found it really boring. But it was important to get through, just like getting through Moby Dick. It was a slog, but it took me a year to do it, but I'm glad I did it. I like the movie a lot better. John Huston's movie.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, you were saying that you were unipolar,
yeah.
but staying on the manic side is what you're saying, rather
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
than the
So
depression.
once I get going on something, I just can't stop.
Well, yeah, for
You
20
know,
years, I guess you couldn't stop having fun.
well, I just that was the thinking point, and my wife was in the editorial department on Amadeus, and
Oh,
as a young,
cool.
we go out to dinner with Milos and hang out. And as a young filmmaker, I asked him if he could give me any advice, and he gave me the best advice I ever got, which was if you want to take a good shit, you have to eat well. And um, that was before, I was orbiting something like Mad God when I was in my 20s, but it was really different. And so there was a 20-year period between the time I gave up Mad God, and I was archiving it, you know, 20 years later. And some of the guys in my studio had grown up watching the making of, Star Wars and Robocop and whatnot. And that's the kind of work that they wanted to do. But now they're digital artists, and that that form had evaporated, the analog form, and they saw me archiving this and asked me what it was, and I said it was a failed project, and it was just archiving the 3 minutes that I had shot. They got inspired and offered to do a shot, and then that just grew. Let's do another shot. I helped them build a set and said you can do it like this, you can do it like that. I had a specific uh, shot that's in the DVD where the main character, the assassin, is going down a flight of stairs and he's holding a light, and his shadow is projected up on the wall behind him. And that was the first shot. And then I just got a shitload of volunteers, and I would get as many as like 15 or 20 people on the weekends, and I would during the week I would work on stuff, and I was dedicated to it exclusively. uh, I would design projects and figure out the processes, and then I could tell a number of these people that volunteers that I would pick up along the way, from giving talks, locally, college students and high school students or whoever, and people that were interested in stop motion, and figure out processes, and then let them do the heavy lifting on the very laborious stuff. There's a scene that you have not seen where the assassin is in it's actually a German command vehicle, and it's a car that he's riding from place to place. He goes through mountains of dead soldiers, and that took between 4 and 6 people 3 years to complete.
Wow.
um, Working Saturdays for 4 to 6 hours. So it was like I was totally fine with what it took to get this stuff done. I mean, I was just looking at a documentary on Auguste Rodin last night, and his journey on the gates of hell were identical to mine. I mean, I'm not being grandiose and associating myself with Rodin, but I mean, there's a lot of corollaries within the creative arts. Carl, are you familiar with Carl Jung's The Red Book?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, his journey with the Red Book, where he descended into hell, his own personal hell, and his family had to, I guess, pull him out. And I like to believe that they sent him to a psychiatrist. But yeah, you see that over and over and over again. And I, not only am I bipolar, but as a therapist, thought like maybe I might be somewhere on the autistic scale, because I have the capacity to be able to visualize things really easily. And while I'm talking to you, I can visualize with my mind's eye, let's say, a symmetrical box, and as I'm talking to you, I can turn that box over and look at it, from any, I can just turn it over and inspect it and or observe it, and I can turn it white. I just did. I can turn it red. I just did. I can turn it black. I just did. So that they say could put you somewhere on the spectrum. When I was getting near the end, the last couple of years, I hated working on Mad God, and I just had to push myself to finish it, and it was killing me to the degree that I had a mental breakdown towards the end and had to go into the psych ward and in recovery for about 6 weeks.
Mm.
It was like a religious experience, really, an epiphany of work, and the path that I chose to walk with Mad God was a path, and without a destination. I really didn't know where I was going
Mm.
until I got there, and then the path branches off, and you go a different way, and you get lost. Then it branches off, and it branches off, and it branches off, and there's another door to open, another door to open, another door to open, and you just don't know where you're going, and you're guided by the light of intuition that in my case, I'm 70 years old, and I was guided by an intuition that I had developed since I was 5 years old. So, practically all of my life.
So, what was the epiphany? Was the epiphany that the journey that's you're always on the path? There is no destination, or did you find an epiphany at the end? Did you arrive at a destination? Was that the epiphany?
Well, you'll have to see the movie to
Mm.
get what that destination was. But that destination was not clear to me
Mm.
until, well, when the guys offered to help, then we worked on Mad God for 12 years. And in the last couple of years, I found an ending that made sense to me, you know. So I mean, it just took I was not worried about it. I was just letting the unconscious mind, unconscious the do all the work. And there's a term, if you're familiar with it, solipsism,
Mm.
which is you can only know your own mind. You're kidding yourself if you think you know anything else. I could hold up this coffee cup and tell you what I'm seeing is blue, whatever they are, roses. Um, but is that blue the same blue that you're seeing? I have no idea. Nobody does. The mind is both, a prison and a universe. And you can go anywhere in it, but you can't get out of it. So it's this really wonderful poetic dichotomy.
Yeah, yeah.
It certainly is. Well, one thing I'd like to ask about the narrative, the literal story, and maybe this helps the listeners a little bit with understanding Mad God, is you're going deeper into from what I've seen, you're going deeper into the earth from you're at the surface and then you're just going
I
deeper.
I don't know if it's Earth.
Hey, I thought the
Okay,
map
so
kind of looked like a
that's
human
where I'm
body.
going there.
I think it's mind.
It
That's
is,
the way I
yeah.
look at it.
Okay, because my question was, do we have an answer to the situation we're in here? Is this a nuclear holocaust 1,000 years down the line after mutations? Is this another planet, which you kind of just suggested, or would you rather me just come up with
I didn't
my?
say it was another planet.
Okay, you said what, but you said you didn't say it was Earth. Is that what you said?
Well, what do you think?
I'd like to say that it's the humans have mutated, and we're talking about Earth here, and we've got someone who the assassin is going deeper to discover different parts of the Earth that have been not visited by any humans, or
So
at least
your mind requires finding a correlation to something that's familiar to you.
possibly.
Definitely.
Well, I have
Uh,
an interest.
Well,
I
but
thought it looked like you were going down a thread in like when the assassin first holds up his map. to me it looked like just vaguely, at least I thought I saw a rib cage or something there, and I thought, oh, interesting. He's going like into a body, into down further and further into the
Yeah, that
bowels
spot
of
there was
like a
belly
body.
of the beast, you know.
Yeah, yeah. But that
Whatever.
also it's a great metaphor for going deeper into the mind as well, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
That's
if I was to say we're going into hell, what would you say to that, Phil? That we just have someone that's going deeper into hell, the 9 circles.
I looked at the creation of the thing as kind of like, say, throwing a pot. So it's a vessel, and that is Mad God. And what the viewers take away is, what they reach into the pot to get. So, um, when an artist does something, he gives it up to the audience, and it's like when your children move away, they're on their own with their own lives, and you know, you it's just out of your hands. It's in the public domain for whoever is interested, and one thing I've found that was never really intentional is it seems to for the people that are interested in it, work for young people as well as older people. You know, I was when we premiered it at Locarno, the composer Dan Wool and I like to sit at the back of the theaters and see how many people leave. And we were sitting next to a family of mom and dad and two little boys about 6 and 5 or something. They were really little kids, and we sat down next to them. I said, if I would not bring my kids to this movie. And, they thought I was commenting on like it being like a terrible Pixar movie or something like that, which is how they thought about it. Oh, it's an animation. We'll bring the kids. And 30 seconds into it, they got up to leave. And the mom said, you were right on the way out. And I said, oh, it gets worse from here. And so they disappeared. They were 4 of the 8 people that walked out. But I was at a film festival too, so I don't know that the other 4 people hated it. They may have been, going to see another, you
Mm,
show.
mm.
Mm-hmm. And you said you were with the music composer when you were
Yeah.
the
And
music was
both the music and the sound, which is half of the movie. Um,
mm-hmm.
so I've been friends with Alex Cox for years, and we would help him out on some of his low budget movies. Doing some special visual effects, and we would screen it at my studio. Some of them at my studio. That's where I met Dan Wool and the composer and Richard Beggs, the sound designer. Richard goes back to Apocalypse Now days, and he's very prolific. He's at the top of his field in terms of sound design, and it was a miracle, that Richard came on. I mean, he started off as an artist and a painter, and he saw this as being something very different. And my direction is not very specific at all. It's all in the casting. I try and embrace professionals and just leave them alone. I might have for each section maybe at most a half a dozen ideas that I want to see, but the rest is like go for it. And I really enjoy that kind of collaboration. Same thing with Dan Wold, the composer. In the final piece, I have about 4 pieces of canned music, mostly classical. But the way I worked with Dan was I had 3 minutes of material shot 30 years ago on film that I bailed on. So I showed Dan some Dan's work with Alex is very much in the vein of Marconi. Morricone. And Alex was, making a lot of, was a big fan of the spaghetti westerns, and that's all I knew about Dan was he wrote that kind of music. And so I showed him some other short films that I made. They were just kind of like really rough sketches that I picked up sound from wherever, or would supplement the visuals just by getting a AM radio and just turning the dial back and forth as it slid through different music like Muzak and rock music and Frank Sinatra, and showed that to him is where my mind was. And it turned out that's where Dan's mind was. And he was very much into like ambient music, and did a lot of theatrical pieces that were with dance companies that were really, really terrific. So we kind of had the Vulcan mind meld thing going, right from the very beginning. So I asked Dan what I did not want to do. I didn't want to have the obligatory temp track that one uses as they pick up whatever piece of music, and that defines the editing as you're doing it. And that's as you're on a feature film, you got to move at a certain pace. But I was going to move at a certain pace. I was going to take whatever it took to get this thing done, no matter how long it took. So Dan, I asked Dan if he could compose or rough in something for those first 3 minutes. And then as we built the movie, the editor, Ken Rogerson, would cut up those 3 minutes as we moved into longer pieces, and just hack that up and repeat it and put it in different places. And the further along we got, we just had more material. And so I worked with, my intention was to work with Dan's score and just get the vibe of it and make that a partner in the creation of the work.
Well, when you say half and half, that's what the film is, the music and the visual. It's it makes total sense. One thing I said to you, Phil, was I felt squished after watching the film, or even at certain times, and then that comes down to sound design. There was the sound was so organic, and I just really felt the frailty of an organic body, and my own organic body being susceptible to being ripped apart, squished, or just observing, or just being there. And the sound design was a huge part of that.
And I was really lucky that Richard came on board. It was such a unique project, and he's an artist, and he just gravitated towards this um, thing. And he because of working in theatrical feature films, he tends a little bit to be very literal. Like the main character, the assassin, has like a leather coat, and so he wants like the kind of creaking that you see in the uniforms of, say, like Nazi officers, that kind of leather on leather feeling. So it's very, but he's very, tends towards literal. And sometimes I wanted to pull him back from that and almost do the reverse of what the visual was, or I'd have to come, that's not true. I'd have to come up with a logic that made sense to him. There's one of the scenes is the assassin in his car is going down this kind of inverted, what would you call it? The name escapes me at the moment, but ziggurat. Yeah, and so it goes down, 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 and gets cameras up here, but it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And Richard had the sound diminished, and there was a song that I wanted in there that I stole, an old American song called "It Ain't Gonna Rain No More, No More," and the sound of the car, and he had them just diminishing. And I said, the sound needs to be present. And he said, but they're at the bottom of this thing, and it's like hundreds and hundreds of yards deep. And I said, well, what if, and everything's like a what if, I don't tell anybody what to do. What if the sound in this volume is echoing up? And so what we're hearing maybe is not the actual sound, but is what has risen, from the bottom. And he goes like, yeah, okay, I'll try that. And so, we would work from time to time like that.
Can I ask? I haven't seen the whole thing, so I haven't seen the resolution. But I was taken immediately at the beginning with the entrance of the assassin, that he wasn't coming in on a flying ship. Okay, like I'm in sci-fi mode.
The assassin a he?
Oh, maybe it's a she. I don't know. Yeah,
Or is it a he or a she?
oh, it's a they. It's an it.
Or is the suit full of smoke or shit?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so we'll stick with the assassin. So the assassin,
In reality, it's a puppet.
right? Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
love how
this
you
is
do that, Phil. You stop us from assuming we know what we're talking about. I really appreciate that.
I certainly didn't. Why should you?
well, you do say that you understood something by the end, and
No, well, no. I had the process revealed itself. I do not seek, I find, and there is a narrative that it actually makes sense, but in no way like a conventional 3-act structure.
Mhm.
There is a logic that I came to, as I went down these various paths.
And did that influence? I don't know, want to dig too personal, but you said you had a breakdown, and then clearly you came out of that place. Was that related? Like once you discovered that process, did you have a personal psychological healing from that epiphany?
It really was I think I mentioned the equivalent of a religious conversion.
Hmm.
I will never be the same after that. So, something happened, that was very profound for me. When I finished, I lost all interest in making things with my hands.
Hmm.
That, was what I have done and trained myself to do and loved all of my life. And when I was done, it was just like a snap of the finger. It was like I'm done.
Hmm.
And I tried once while I was working on some other. I'm writing stuff now. I've been writing stuff for the last 20 years that were I tried to get made into movies, and there was no way they would get into movies, be made into movies. And John Davison and Ned Newmeyer said, well, that's because your work is art damaged, meaning it's never going to make any money. And that made sense to me, and that's what launched me on doing Mad God, whatever it took. I mean, that's kind of religious like thinking. And so I gave up. I stopped making things with my hands and have started writing. And no one was ever going to make these movies that I wanted to make. And so and I don't write conventional scripts. I write the feeling. So I don't use a script writing program. I just do it in Word. And so now I am embarking. I'm writing every day. In fact, yesterday I just finished up something that I started in 2005 and then put on ice and then picked it back up, earlier in the year, and have been diligently working on it for the last month and a half. And yesterday I finally completed it. And now I'm embarking on the journey of creating graphic novels. And so I've got people that know the ropes there, and they're helping guide me into it.
Is there something that draws you to, and we'll just say sci-fi in particular, because most of your work, I mean, that's what we all see, and I mean, you could cross it over to sci-fi, fantasy, horror.
Right.
But is there something that, because you don't read a whole lot of fiction, I think you've told me before. You
No, no, not really. I mean, I used to, but time is like of critical importance to me. Well, I stay up really late working, until 1, 2, 3 o'clock, and by then I'm pretty pooped, and so I read articles and book reviews, and that's about all I have the capacity to do. I don't. I at this point I don't want to be exposed to anybody's literary art. From time to time, I'll go back and say, revisit Lovecraft or Kurt Vonnegut.
Hmm.
But they're revisiting, you know, um, you know, more youthful pleasures, of like, I know I can stand reading this. I don't want to take the risk of reading something, or take the time. But that's pretty rare. So most of my input is, just articles and reviews.
Have you happened to
but with
read any China Miéville?
Started, can't read it.
Oh, okay, okay. The flavor strikes me very similar to
Oh,
your
I've heard.
aesthetic.
Yeah, that's why I tried. But I'm dyslexic on top of everything else. So it's like, yeah, I don't really stand a chance.
Right.
And then when it comes to film, as a filmmaker, what are you looking at, or what's something that you've seen lately that you did find really inspiring, or at least entertaining, and you enjoyed?
Not that much narrative stuff, more like documentaries, kind of with the same mindset of, my reading regime. Just watched a really good documentary on Rodin's Gates of Hell last night, and then there's on Shutter. There's a 3-hour long history of, folk horror in both literature and, cinema that
Oh,
I'm
nice.
working through. I can only do like an hour a night of it, but, so more things like that. In terms of theatrical cinema,
Not so much.
no, I don't like narrative that much, unless it's in the hands of, like a so-called master, and there aren't that many of them around. There are not many iconoclasts out there anymore. It's like Dave Fincher and, not even Scorsese. He's gotten too old. He just makes the same movie over and over again. But, um, they're out there. Francis Coppola, who I worked with when he was trying to do a Pinocchio project years ago, has got a project that he's been working on for the last 20 years or so, called Megalopolis, and he's going to fund it with his own money. He sold off a bunch of wineries, and going to put
Yeah.
$1 million into this thing. And I've been talking to his nephew, contacted me, and, or we happened to be at the same place, and I expressed interest in, assisting Francis on that. So I hopefully that will happen at some point.
That is really exciting. Yeah, Megalopolis, and this is Francis doing a science fiction, from what I have heard.
I don't know anything about it.
I think he was talking about it being a science fiction,
Yeah.
not a
Oh,
space opera, but something.
yeah. I visualize it as like I see Metropolis, because the titles are so similar. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that is orbiting in Francis's consciousness someplace.
That's amazing. So, I would like to ask about a little story that I heard, and if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine. But I think this is super fun. You did acid while filming Return of the Jedi, And can you tell us a little bit about how that happened, and maybe even a little bit about how the psychedelics have affected your art or the way that you approach creation?
Yeah, well, it happened right at the end of Return of the Jedi. And at that point in time, all of us that, or many of us that were working on the thing, kind of felt that, we'd been sentenced to, 3 consecutive terms of high school. And although Jedi was fun with what we were doing, I wasn't that wild about the direction it was taking, with the Ewoks and that kind of stuff. I know he had to end with some kind of a happy epiphany. Um, but I tried to talk him into doing something a little bit darker, and it was like, but he's a commercial,
Are you
director.
talking about George, or are you talking about Mark?
And he
Yeah.
had even, I really enjoyed working with them. I learned a lot from them. They were really good creative managers, and that's where I learned to, hire the best people you can and stay out of their way. And but the artist that I really connected with, because he did not worry about the commercial value of his art, was Paul Verhoeven. And Paul and I really connected. I mean, certainly his movies, because they're theatrical, have to have an aboutness about them. But we connected on a number of planes politically. I mean, we're pro-Palestinian. We came to the conclusion that we were both existentialist Buddhists. So, um, we he's what I define as an artist, of like a pure artist, and George and Stephen are commercial artists, and artists, all the same, but not as compelling to me as Paul's work. When asked who are you making movies for, he said, I'm making them for me. A friend of mine was coming through the Bay Area on the way to Southern California, and didn't he dropped off a bunch of acid at my house, and I put it behind the mantle over my fireplace. There was a space where I could put it, and I forgot about it for years. And then on Return of the Jedi, it just occurred to me, oh, I've got this stuff, and why not? So I have to justify, some of the things that I do. That and so I put up a video camera. I was going to make a science experiment of it. I got a gin and tonic, and sat down and laid out like these 6 tabs of window pane, and waited 15 minutes. And I was like, eh. And so I made the classic error of bing. Well, nothing's happened. Nothing's happening. And then like blam, and I could communicate with objects, across. I could send plasma. Anyway, LSD stories. And I went to the center of the earth with my cat Brian. Um, I went in through, like where I keep the pots and pans, and in the next day, my wife said, "Hey, I heard a bunch of pots and pans banging around." And so I guess I literally, went into the cupboard where all the pots and pans were. It was like a little crawl space. And I spent the next, untold billions of years at the center of the earth with my cat Brian. And it was really peaceful and calming. And I imagine that's what heaven would be like to me, is just like
Mm.
grand nothingness where your awareness just exists without any conflict or thinking, just like pure being. And I took the acid around when my wife went to bed, and the sun rose, and I went to go to bed in the room, and I opened up the door, and it splattered with blood. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just calmly closed the door and went like, this is not happening. and opened the door, and everything was fine. Um, and so I'm friends with Adam Savage, and we were, talking about LSD stories. I only took LSD once that time, and really am not incentivized to take it again. I mean, once was enough. And Adam was telling me that, he had a few bad trips, and I said, well, I guess I'm lucky that I didn't have a bad trip. Leary, when he was doing his initial experiments with LSD, there was always somebody in the room with him, and in case they flipped out, so they could bring him down. And well, I said, yeah, well, I guess I'm lucky. I was just on my own. And he said, no, you weren't. You had Brian the cat.
Yeah, you had Brian.
And so I had an animal familiar. And Adam said, in surveys, when people are asked what are the most meaningful experiences in your life, many times what comes up is having children and taking acid. And I would add to that having children, taking acid, and Mad God. I mean, they all kind of exist on a very similar but different plane.
Amazing.
And did you end up going to on set the following day because you were doing
Yeah.
Jedi?
Well, fortunately, I took it on a Friday, and so I'd come down enough to drive in. As I was driving in on the freeway, there's a freeway sign, and trails came off of it. Just one sign. And to this day, whenever I cross that sign, it still has trails. They're going away after all these years. But that sign, just an innocuous sign, freeway sign. And so I went into work, and they were shooting the blue screen live action of the skiffs that go into the Sarlacc. That
Oh, right.
like the tugboats on Jabba's barge, and
The barge, yeah.
and I walked into the blue screen stage, and it was the entire stage, was like 50 feet high, and it wrapped around. It was like this brilliant blue, and that blew my mind. And so I just had to go home and spend the next couple of days, just I was not ready to go back to work, so I called in sick.
I imagine it'd be hard to look George Lucas in the eyes. He seems like a disapproving guy. I don't know if he is, but it'd be like for looking at your dad when you're high or you just
I
got
didn't
drugged. It's like,
naked or anything, so I mean, I just walked in and walked out.
okay.
Well, since you brought us back to Mad God being a peak experience like doing acid, I wanted to ask you that one question I started on. I couldn't help, like at the very beginning of Mad God, when he comes in, like I said, not on a flying ship,
He's not
but
a
on a the assassin.
It's an I don't know.
The ship, the assassin's ship, is on a string, right? And that immediately reminded me of this movie I'm sure you know, by a Dutch guy. What's his name? Anders Rano Klarland. It's called Strings.
Not
Ever seen this movie? It's a stop motion animation about puppets, but the strings are in the movie. The whole movie is about the puppets being on the strings.
I didn't recognize the name.
Yeah. And so that's what I immediately thought of as the assassin is coming in on this ship that is on a string, right? It's not flying.
It was more like a diving bell.
A diving bell. Okay. Yeah.
He's not driving a ship.
The intrinsic question is, where is the assassin coming from? Where is that string attached to? Is there an answer to that? Is that sort of part of the resolution?
What would you imagine?
Yeah, well, I'm starting to flash back to my own acid trips. And, life itself is like a descent into hell, right?
My point is, it's your story, not mine.
It's sure. Okay. Well, I guess for me, what I got out of what I've seen so far of Mad God is there is some place outside that we come from. And maybe it's outside of time, maybe it's outside of space, who knows, but that string goes somewhere. In my mind, it almost well it's a beautiful artistic device, I guess, is what I'm saying, right? That it itself implies that there is
Yeah.
somewhere a fixed point outside of all this.
Yeah.
And I love that device, especially like in Strings, right? This movie where you include the artifice, the mechanisms, the mechanics that you need to make things happen that you would usually hide. You would usually hide the string, right?
Yeah,
But you
on
include
that
them in the narrative.
point, I mean, there's if Mad God is about anything, it's about process and scale. And so the narrative, such as it is one will find as you get through it, is really about process. There is a process coming, and that structurally defines the narrative, and then scale. I mean, I really mucked around with scale a lot. So, I mean, just like what is the assassin? How big are characters and objects relative to each other? People make a lot of assumptions because the assassin looks like a 6-foot guy. That's up for grabs. It's scale is all over the place, and that was intentional as well.
Well,
Or,
one of the first things
I mean, I found that as I was going along, it was like, oh, I got this. This is another element that I can play, and I've got like another idea that I've written up for the sequel to Mad God. I'm never going to do anything like Mad God, and the next thing I do, I'm not going to do unless somebody gives me the money and I can hire a crew. But it is called Pequin's Pendequin, and the title came up when I was in college smoking weed with a friend. I have no idea, what it meant, but the name stuck with me for all of these years. And then, a light went off in my head, and I saw this whole thing, just like a big bang. So I spent the COVID, and it does mean something. The main character is Pequin, who's a shapeshifter, and Pequin is its destination. There's no definition of sex for Pequin. It starts off as like a sock puppet, but then it's a shapeshifter. So whatever it puts on, it can become. But it's Pequin's journey, and it's so I'm going to be looking for money for it. So no one would ever, and nor would I ever do a Mad God or pay for or do a Mad God again. So this is more in the vein of I'm thinking of it as like kind of a Warner Brothers cartoon. That's the vibe. But as they say, the canary sings one song, so it'll have my worldview, but it will be. Don't take me literally on that, but that's in my mind, that's kind of it's much lighter. And I spent my COVID year and a half. I sculpted all maquettes for all the characters. Wrote a version of a script, and so I do a lot like animation companies. You write a script and then you figure it all out in the storyboard. And so I drew the 800 storyboards. Showed me that what I had was enough to make a movie out of. And then I did a bunch of key art. I shot all the maquettes against blue screen and comped them into backgrounds. And so I've got all the key art, script, and storyboards. So I'm ready to go. And Shudder seems to be interested in at least listening to a pitch.
Exciting. It seems like I mean you've never stopped being busy.
Well, that's
And
part of my bipolar thing. If
right.
I'm like a shark in the water, if I stop swimming, I die. I would go insane.
I was really struck by something you said in another interview I saw, where somebody asked you, how do you like CGI or watching CGI? And you were like, I don't like it at all. I'm not interested in reality. I'm interested in hyper realistic, not
Yeah,
realistic. And I
yeah.
think that's
Oh, that's definitely the way that Dennis Muren and my philosophy work.
yeah.
Is like, and for any of this stuff, practically most of the time you go in and talk to the director about what they want. Is like, I want it to be real, but it's actually more like a magician's kind of sleight of hand. Number one, you can't really make it real. You can make a puppet real, but
Mhm.
it's always like a simulation for a thing, and so you have to give it inject it with another serum of um, something that punches through reality um, in a way, and it is kind of like a sleight of hand. And I actually I don't know how you get it, but when you get it, you've got it.
Well, that's when you get art, right? Like, I feel
Well,
like,
and that's what we did on, I think we got that on Jurassic Park and then Starship Troopers, and then everything went to hell after that. I mean, it was like, it looked like things were going like this, and then it went like that,
yeah.
you know,
Well, I
almost
think
over.
that's just it, right? Movies went through this sort of phase of photorealism, right? And like compare a painting by someone who just tries to make it look like a photograph, and you compare that to a Hieronymus Bosch or a Dali painting, or something truly creative, and you realize like, oh well, this is where the art is. This is where the creativity is to hyper, to highlight things. This is why a graphic novel, it has so much more to convey than say just a picture book of photos. You can't do in hyper reality and just sort of realistic CGI what you're meant to do as an artist and as a creator and as a storyteller, which is to make new realities or different realities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, why would you do otherwise?
Yeah.
Why would you, I mean, I think, I think history has taken a wrong turn a number of times, like, with Zola, and the reality of the novel, is like, really, boy, that stuff is tedious. I don't know why, you know, people like that stuff. I mean, I've tried, but it's like, ugh, Jesus Christ, this is tedious. Everything
Well, I
else.
can't wait to see what you do with graphic novels next. I think that's going to be super exciting.
Yeah.
Seems like we have a lot to look forward to, Phil, um,
Well, I
with
hope.
stuff you're coming out with.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, actually, with this Pequins project, oh, I didn't tell you. Again, one of the things, that I mean, I did tell you was, influence was, 1940s Warner Brothers movies, and I knew Tex Avery. Yeah, he was very influential in, the creation of Bugs Bunny and all that.
Hmm.
And so we worked at this commercial house called Cascade Pictures of California, which was on the corner of Seward and Romaine in Hollywood, and it had like big sound stages and all kinds of stuff. And a little stage 6 is where we did the special effects. We did animation, everything. So it was a really great school. And Tex and I would hang out and smoke cigarettes. And I was like early 20s, and I thought he was a really old man, but looking back, he was like in his 50s. Here I am. I still think of Tex as being an old man. And so we'd be outside of the stage smoking cigarettes. And I asked him if he would show me how to work a dummy sheet, where you break down all the frames and dialogue. And so he goes, sure, Phil. And so he, writes up, hey, what's up, Doc? And breaks that down into frames. And then does some key poses of Bugs Bunny. And then writes in the frames, between the key poses, whatever they are. And it was like, oh, that's great. Of course, I never used the dummy sheet ever, but I just wanted to know how they work. And
That's amazing.
so I asked, boy, hey, Tex, could you sign it? He goes, well, sure. And he writes, to my good friend Phil, Tex Avery. And I saved that. I've got it framed, in my studio.
Phil, again, you've given us so much of your time. Thank you so, so much. We have a lot of gratitude for your time now and for everything you've done in film and for this new one and what you're coming out with in the future. Um, you know you're appreciated, and you're inspiring so many people to create. And he's even just as a viewer, you inspire me to not try to find answers too a little bit with this conversation, because I don't know how many people are like me, but I want to figure all the shit out. I when it comes to life in general, but sometimes someone's art.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And I like how you really emphasize that, and it's important, because we don't need answers, and maybe being at peace without those answers is something that could help people with more than, in many ways, I will say.
Well, the
Well,
process.
that's the Zen part, not the existential part. So.
Yeah. They go well together, though.
Thanks
All
so
right,
much, Phil.
Phil.
It's been a real pleasure
Okay,
talking
well,
to you. Thank you for all your time.
I've got to go pee.
Right.
Yeah.
On. All right.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Take care. See ya.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that. We sure did. Phil was really interesting and so fun to hang out with. We're so happy that he gave us some of his time to talk about his latest film, and we highly recommend it. Mad God. It'll blow your mind. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.